Hello, good morning, everybody. We have a very, very full house today, so I'm going to wait 30 seconds for everyone to finish making their cup of tea, get settled in. I know that a lot of you are very excited about this. I wish I had the ability to follow along. I'm going to do my best. But I'm not sure whether I'm ever going to be able to execute on what Lance is going to take us through. So very excited to have Lance Rubin here. So he is the Chief EXL Officer and co-founder of EXL Cloud. And we also have Damon Hornstein, who is the CFO of Weel. I think joining us here today, we have members of our CFO community and also some Weel customers. So I welcome you all. Hold on to your hats. I hope you get so much out of this session. I really encourage you to use the Q&A function or the chat function. I'm sure Lance and Damon will be happy to answer any questions at all. And I always like to joke that because Damon's my boss, I like to just throw him under the bus. And if you have any technical queries, just really push him there, because I sickly get joy out of seeing him sweat. So I will hand over to Damon and Lance. Again, any questions? And thank you again for joining us. I hope you enjoy.
Great. Did you want to screen share, Adriana? Or
I think I'm going to screen share, or was Adriana going to do the first?
Yeah, Lance, if you can, can't even speak. I'm glad you guys are doing it. If you can share your screen, and I'll let you run with it.
Great. Well, look, thanks everyone for joining. We're thrilled to be able to put on this session today. As Adriana mentioned, this is part of our CFO masterclass series that we've been conducting over the last few months. We're really excited to have Lance on the line with us today to take us through a pretty interesting and incredibly relevant area for the finance and CFO audience looking at financial modelling. For those of you, or maybe I'll just start with an acknowledgement of country. In the spirit of reconciliation, Weel and the Australian CFO community respectfully acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respect to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island people today. If we just move to the next slide. So look, today we're joined by Lance Rubin, and Lance is a really exciting speaker to have join us today. Lance has a background from, I guess, started his career on the professional services and finance side at NAB and KPMG. So highly credentialized in applying his skills in the real world, and then since then has gone and set up a number of businesses.
Industries that I wish.
Yeah, well, maybe industry defining, but most relevantly today, he's the co-founder and CEO or Chief EXL Officer of EXL Cloud, and is the founder of Model Citizen. And we're, as I said, thrilled to have him join us today. I'm Damon Hornstein. I'm the CFO at Weel. Weel helps put on Australian CFO masterclass for this group. If we just go to the next slide, Lance. So look, I think there's a couple of things that we're hoping to bring to everyone on this call today. It's the idea of this session is to really help you get a bit of some hands-on practical experience on how to use spend data and extract it so you can help get better insights from that data. We find in this world we live in, there's a lot of data available. There's a lot to work with, but it's really being able to find tools to help you properly surface the insights and actually draw something meaningful from that data. Excel, is a really, really well-known and I guess highly familiar tool to a lot of people. But I think the more advanced functionality of Excel is something that's that's often missed, and maybe not fully understood. And I think, with Lance today, I think that this will help us unlock a little bit of this. So look, I think, three broad topics today. We'll talk through some of the foundations and concepts. We're going to work through a bit of a practical case study, and Lance will take us through that on screen. And then at the end of this session, we'll leave some time for questions and answers, and allow you to raise any questions. Throughout the session, there is a chat functionality that you'll see. If you use the chat screen at the bottom of your Zoom interface, feel free to post any questions throughout this session. When we get to the end of the session, we can then pick some of those off to us, to Lance. So look, without further ado, Lance, I'll hand over to you to kick us off.
Thank you. Thanks, Damon, and thanks everyone. So as Damon said, it's been a while since I've been going through this, and certainly one thing I noticed is the Excel community is not familiar with dynamic arrays, firstly, and we're going to do a bit of that, and Power Query as well. But before we get there, we need to think about the foundations and the concepts that we're going to cover. Like, it's all good getting into Excel and doing nerdy stuff, but we've really got to step back and say, what are we trying to do? What is the data story? How do we create a data story? How do we have actionable insights? And that's less about the data. It's more about the creativity and thinking. So I'm not going to read these slides. You'll get these slides at the end, but I'll just talk briefly through it. Really, this is an approach of how you create and structure a data story. And really, it's about the action and the insight that you're going to drive from that insight. And if we don't know what we're looking at, or we don't hypothesize what we're looking at, then why do it? A dashboard in itself is useless. A model in itself is useless. It's the action and the story that you get off those dashboards and models that are impactful. And that's what you need to look at and focus on. So I'm going to obviously go into a bit more detail and granularity on formulas and shortcut keys and stuff like that. But the main thing is to take away, what's the big picture? What are we trying to do? So here's one. And by the way, I was given updated data, literally 20 minutes ago, and I had to redo. So some of these slides won't be the exact same data outputs that you get when you get the raw data which you're going to be sending through. But this is an example. And so we need to understand, although this is done in Power BI, this particular dashboard, but it's all about, what are we trying to do? Are we trying to explain something, or are we trying to give people the ability to explore? Is it explanatory or exploratory? So that's quite important to try and understand. This is a bit of both in this case, and there's a risk to that, because I've got all the slices on the left. There's all places I can go, but then I might miss the story. So what I've done here is I've said, okay, I want to look at T&E, right? Travel and entertainment. It's the one that obviously gets focus in most organizations. So I've sliced it for all the things that you can see under the account name. And so, hey, presto, clearly in April, there was some big party and entertainment was a big spend at $16,000. There's lots of flights in January and March. Where are people going during January and March? What's happening? And do we have the right categorization? Sometimes it's actually not about the data. It's actually about the source and whether we've actually got the right split between what's travel versus flights versus incurred whilst traveling. It's very easy to get that wrong. And then you, as the finance function or the CFO or FP&A, trying to get that insight, it's quite difficult because you might not have the right categorization. So understanding all of that is critical. Look out for behaviors. What's the carrot versus the stick? Betty B, who is a completely made up name, I've populated the data with some random names and some random forecasts and stuff just to kind of paint the picture of the story. So Betty B, for some reason, likes May travel a lot more. She's traveling a lot during May. So why? What is the reason for that? And Dal, on the other hand, likes her December holidays clearly, with a bit of entertainment packed in as well. So, are we going to try to drive the right behaviors on spend? And do we need to have a discussion about people owning the spend? Is it an investment or is it a loss? So important to understand, how do we empower versus micromanaging. And a lot of this is not necessarily about, obviously, data and analysis, but that's where you need to go. Those are the actions you need to take when you get these insights. So let's have a conversation with Betty about May. Was there a major conference there? Yeah, maybe there was, maybe there wasn't. It's overseas, there's lots of flights compared to other places. And also starting to look at whether there's opportunities to have volume discounts for particular merchants that we're spending on, and a whole lot of things of how we behave in our spend information. What drives those behaviors will ultimately drive scenarios and actions. So if we want to drive new customers, we need to spend more on marketing. If we want to have more product awareness, we have more spend campaigns. We want to hire talent, of course, salaries and wages. So don't just think about the expense, think about what's driving that and how do we need to act and what scenarios might we have to play with. Foreign exchange, interest rates is a big one. And of course, just general expenses are under pressure and going up. So do we need to fund? Do we need to hedge some of the interest rate funding? Do we need to look at foreign exchange if we've got overseas? The data does have multi-currency. Tax planning, can we be a bit more efficient with tax? All of these things, start to think beyond just the expense line item. Think about what's driving the expense. What do we need to do? What do we need to go? So consider the following and validate some of the indicators. So what exposures might you have and risks that you might need to mitigate? So if we've got particular exposures to particular currencies or particular merchants, these are important things to understand, because if a merchant is quite a significant part of our spend and it's a part of our core process, what happens if they have a data breach? What happens if they have a credit event? What happens if they run into cash flow challenges? And what happens if their costs start to blow out? How does that impact us? What are the trends and relationships? You saw a couple there with Betty and Adele. So what are those things that we need to think about in terms of the relationships between the spend and other factors and other dimensions? Ratios of performance and metrics are important in terms of cost to income ratio and other key ratios and factors that we need to think about, and put that on people's KPIs and personal KPIs or divisional KPIs. And what sort of negotiating or discounting can we get out of this? So these are 4 areas which you can gain a lot of value from your spend data. If you use it in this way, then you can start to extract those nuggets to then go take to management and to heads of the business and actually have a discussion around those opportunities to create real value. So expenses is after the fact. So how do we get proactive? How do we make some changes to some of those is a critical part. So then when we start to do all of that, we say, okay, well, at some stage, I'm going to have to analyze this data. So how do I analyze it? What's the sort of approach to building best practice spreadsheets and models? I use the acronym FAST. It's one of the recognized financial modeling standards out there. FAST stands for flexible, appropriate, structured, and transparent. And I'm not going to read all of them, but if you think about your workbooks, are they flexible? Can I play with scenarios? Can I do sensitivity analysis? If not, well, it's not flexible. If I'm hard coding a formula, then that renders it inflexible. So we've got to be very careful with that. What's appropriate for the particular business and what's appropriate to present is kind of a tricky one. It's not, you need to work with the business to understand what are their key factors and their key drivers and key focuses. And then you design an appropriate dashboard or model to follow that. What you'll notice here in what I'm going to do is we have to be highly structured. It's a foundation to any workbook. If we all over the place and we don't have a good structure, that's from a sheet perspective and sheet structure and workbook structure, we get into all sorts of mess. And then transparency, there's nothing worse than having a black box, a really complex spreadsheet that people don't understand, or stuff hidden in VBA or stuff hidden elsewhere. It needs to be traceable. We need to understand it. We need to have the ability to make some of those changes. So a critical component of actually understanding how a spreadsheet and a model works. Now, what model are you going to build? So I wrote the financial modeling study guide for the CA. And one of the things that I realized in my own accounting qualification is, firstly, there was no such thing as financial modeling. There was no training, there was nothing. And as I went through my career, it's one of the areas that I found was the biggest gap. And so in doing that, I suddenly came across all these different terminologies that I've never heard before, like a three-way model. And hopefully now more people know what a three-way model is, but many won't know what a four-way model is, or a one-way, or a two-way. And so this is an example of going back to what's the purpose? What am I trying to build? What are we trying to achieve? And therefore, what model am I going to need to build? In many cases, particularly in the one that we're doing now, we're doing a one-way. It's just we're just focusing on expenses. We're not looking at the full P&L. We're not looking at the balance sheet. We're not looking at cash flow or anything else like that. Yes, expenses relate to cash flow on a somewhat quasi basis, particularly expenses, but some expenses you pay, 30, 60, 90 days, depending on your credit terms, or depending on, if it's regulatory payments for super and those sort of things. So one way is just the one financial statement. Two-way is a combination of cash flow and profit and loss, or profit and loss and balance sheet, or cash flow and balance sheet. Three-way is your fully integrated income statement, balance sheet, and cash flow. So all three. When you're starting to get more sophisticated in your modeling, and particularly if you want to go for funding, your three-way is going to be the one that's going to get you to where you need to get to. Particularly for those that are asking for bigger debt or needing to raise capital or IPO. You can't IPO a company on the stock exchange if you don't have a three-way model. They just won't let you do it. And then the four-way model is really taking you back to the one-way. So it includes a statement called the sources and uses of funds. So it just makes it really simple. What's cash in and cash out? So I have my full three-way. Cash flow statement's not really intuitive for non-financial people. Cash flow from investing and financing and operating activities, is not always well understood. So how do we make it easy for people? Everyone knows cash in the door, cash out the door. That's what your sources and uses are from. What are the sources of my cash? How they're going out, and what are the uses is an important part. So what should the model contain? Again, these are some extracts from the study guide that I wrote. We've got data, we've got assumptions, we've got logic, we've got calculations, we've got outputs and dashboards, and we've got some appendices and checks and lookups. These are the things that make a good model, by having these aspects. So if you don't have these, or they're all commingled, or they're not well structured, obviously we're going to share a template with you that you can use. It's got that structure already embedded in it. And so it's important that you follow a particular structure and you think about what we're focusing on. In this case, we're focusing on the top bit, the time series, some alerts, checks, historical data. There's some mapping and transformation that we're going to do within Power Query, and of course focused on expense data. We're not doing any of the others, but depending on the requirements, depending on what you need, some of those others might come into play. Sorry, I should have circled outputs and dashboards. We're doing a bit of those as well, but certainly the main focus in terms of building would be the top section. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to jump to my Excel and really go through some of the training content. You're going to get anonymized data extraction workbook. You're going to get a training manual. You're going to obviously get access to this video live. And so I'm going to try to go as slow as I can to show you how to use the template, use structured references. For those that haven't used structured references, this is references of formulas that reference back into tables. If you're not familiar with Excel tables, it's an important part of being highly structured in Excel. Tables have been around for a very, very long time, as well as structured references. And ultimately, this is going to be the ability for you to also explore dynamic arrays. Dynamic arrays, I think, has been out for about 2 years. Power Query has been around for 10 years. For those that have never heard of it or used it, it's been around for a very, very long time. Power Query is your gateway drug to Power BI. It is the way in which you're going to get into the next level of BI. So this will be a really good way for you to understand it. And then the worked solution, which we will give you probably in a few weeks post. So let me jump straight to it. So can everyone see my Excel? Just want to make sure I'm sharing the same screen because I've changed. Yep, cool, thanks. Okay, so what we've got here is a structured workbook. We've got a setup, we've got data, we've got pivot tables and pivot charts, we've got actuals, we've got dashboards. This is completely blank. There's nothing in here. There's nothing in the tables or the charts. This is really the starting point of what we're going to give you. And we're going to give you this as well as the data so that you can start to play and work with it. Ultimately, I'm going to show you what the end result is, and you're going to have the ability to look at that. So in doing this, you can see straight away how we're structured. You know, we've got different sheet colors for the different areas. Of course, this is more the data, and this is more some of the outputs. Particularly as we go through some of these, and we've got some of these dashboards that you're able to use these. The key thing is really in some of the actuals in the forecast here, which I'm going to start to play with, and being able to put that into a really well-structured format and table structure. So here you can see again a structured formula process where things are laid out and well labeled. So organization name, we're going to call this Weel. Class, we're going to call this expense. Type, we're going to call this overheads. By the way, all of this is going to be included in the manual step by step, but of course you'll be able to follow on screen. Group currency, so if we've got multiple currencies, you want to convert that. Here we're going to do group currency. For this purpose, we don't have tracking categories in the data that was sent, but you can use this to populate tracking category data. Now you have to stitch and merge data together. But of course, for the purpose of this demonstration, we're just going to look at expense data. We're not necessarily going to look at tracking category information, and maybe that's something we can look at before down the track. So once you've set up the core structure, we've got our headings. So the headings is the headings that are going to come through into this structured workbook. This is a table. You can see the table sign come up, and when I click off it, the table's gone. So excuse all the different add-ins at the top. I know it's a bit overwhelming for people, but of course, ultimately, these are just straight tables in Excel. What we're going to do then is we're going to go into our data tab, and we're going to open up our query. So the Power Query Editor is really, as I said, it's been around for over a decade, and it gives us the ability to update and transform data and use and get data from many different sources. Right now, we're just bringing it from an Excel file. It can be CSV, it can be a database, it can be Access database, it can be or a whole range of different data sources. Now, in the version that you're going to get, it's going to have the same issue. There's going to be an error because you don't have access to the data path, which Fernando and my team has built this for me to use, and then of course for you to use as well. So we're going to have to change the source of this data. All of these columns and headers are already been designed for you. So you can see here we've put the org name, Weel. Sorry, it should be the 2 E's, not 2 L's. So we'll fix that. And ultimately having all of these different headers, group currency, and of course we can start to use these. But what I'm going to do here, and I guess we would love to hear on the chat those that have used Power Query before. As we can see, particularly for this, we have the steps of what each of the transformation. There's no coding involved. It's just literally transforming the data as you go through. But the key thing here is really the data source is not correct. So what we're going to do is we're going to change that. So hit the data source settings tab. This is the particular the source that we want to change. We click change source. And what we're going to do now is we're actually going to click browse, and we're going to select the updated data, which you can see I received at 10:36 a.m. Compared to the previous version, which was a number of weeks back. But I can still, using Power Query, still process this data highly efficiently, and you can connect it live if you wanted to. So this is an important part to get the data and the reporting highly automated. All I'm doing is I'm just changing the source. So I'm going to click import. I'm going to click OK. I'm going to click close. And now I'm just going to click off and come back. Now the preview is working. So let's see what this is actually doing. So this is what's coming through the source. Then it selects a particular navigation. If I click this little cog, it actually shows me what particular items I'm selecting within the data source. If we're changing type, and you can see as I'm clicking this, ultimately you're just making these changes manually. No, Power Query is not in Google Sheets, sorry. And ultimately, this is where you have the ability to transform data, we have our raw data, but we've got our most important table, which is our table PL, our table P&L. And we're going to use reference to table P&L quite a lot. So I'm going to close and load that data. So that's now sitting in what's called a data model sitting within Excel. But what I need to do is I now need to refresh this. But what I'm going to do, let's go fix my spelling error. Right. And that is going to update in the back end as well, because it is a set data source. Now I'm going to click refresh all. So what Power Query is now doing is processing that for me, and it's putting that into a table structure. It's also adding the ability for other information. So it's codified every item class as expense, which is what 0 is in terms of its designation, class and type. And then we have a whole lot of information. So it's a reasonably long set of data. We have 20,000 lines, 20,010 lines. And so the source file format is straight from Weel. Weel have provided that format. So it's just their format. So it's already in the Weel format for you to use. Sorry, let me turn off that buzzing phone. So what we've got now is the ability to use the Weel data in this format straight away. You don't have to do any changes. You can just use it for yourself. That's the whole purpose of us giving you a template. Now what we want to do is we want to use this data to actually start doing some actuals and forecasting. So if I look at particular periods and particular things that I want to work on, it's an important part to really, let me just come out of this here. What I want to try and do is I want to try and use the data that I've just produced in a way that allows me to do some forecasting. So the key thing here is really looking at a combination of dynamic arrays and structured references. So we're going to do 60 months in terms of a forecast. But what we want to look at is what is the minimum? We want to understand our data. So what's the min? We want to use our table PL, which is a structured reference. So we're going to refer to that, and we're going to open the square bracket. This is, as I said, quite a structured reference. We're going to type in period, close square brackets, and close. So all that data that I've just processed, the minimum period is 30 April 2020. So that's where the data starts. Now, nice and easy. I like being lazy. Copy down, just change min to max. And now we can see what is the last period that the data relates to. So we've got the starting point of the data and we've got the ending point of the data. Now, this is where we start to get really cool with dynamic arrays. We've got 60 periods. So I'm going to go equals. I'm going to use the sequence. If you've not used dynamic arrays or use some of the formulas, definitely start looking at it. So the sequence formula allows me to create a dynamic array. And I'm going to explain what it is exactly in a moment. Sequence, I'm not choosing rows. I am going to be choosing columns, which is periods. I'm going to go 60 columns across. I'm going to start with number 1, and I'm going to close brackets. I'm going to push enter. A dynamic array, you can see that this shades away. It's the same formula. It actually is a change in the formula coding language of Excel. What it does is it gets rid of absolute and relative references, and this is now 60 periods. If I change this to 30, right, in a couple of seconds, bang, that's 30. So the formula is expandable and dynamic. That's why it's called dynamic, and it's an array formula, but it's a new form of an array formula, not the old squiggly bracket, which I never kind of used. But this is a much easier array formula. You can't break that until you type something in and it breaks the whole formula. If I delete it, it comes back. So make sure that you're able to use dynamic arrays and allows you to expand. But we're going to go back to 60 periods, and that takes us all the way to the end. So an important part of learning some of the latest is definitely looking at dynamic arrays and how that's going to be used. Now what we're going to do is we're going to put in our start month. So what we're using is just a basic if statement. So if H12 is 1, which is our first period, then what I want to do is I want to take C10, which is 30 April 2020, and I want to take the month prior because that's the start month. Otherwise, I'm going to take the end of the month plus 1, right? So I'll push enter, control shift right arrow, just bring it back, hold down the control, and Control R. So again, you'll be able to work through this. I'm trying to go as slow as possible, but if I'm going too fast, please let me know. So I haven't got the chat up yet, but if someone can just call out if I'm going a little bit too fast, I'm happy to slow down a little bit. Then we're going to put in the end of month formula. So EO month, for those that haven't used it, it's a really cool formula. I'm going to use the 0, which is the end of that particular month. So we have the start, and now we have the end. Control Shift right arrow, bring it back, Control R. So now when I look at that, I've got 60 months. It's the 31st of March, 2025. I've built my time series. The time series is your structure. This is the most important part of your model when you're first building it, is the structure of it. To make sure if I want to change that model, ultimately making sure that that is very well structured. The next thing that we want to do is you want to pick up the difference between an actual period and a forecast period. So what we're going to do here is, if that end of month is beyond the 30 April, if it's before the 30th April 2021, it's an actual period, which makes sense. Otherwise, it's forecast. So enter. Now, not all of these are dynamic arrays, so I'm just going to be using Control Shift right arrow normally. So this is where we start to automatically. So this means that if any of these dates change, this forecast period will move to the right. I'm not manually hard coding. If I'm manually hard coded the date, then that's inflexible. I break my most important aspect of best practice, which is flexible, the F in fast. Important to keep that dynamic so that it's driven by the data. The data moves, the forecast will move. Now what we're going to do is number of days. So maybe we've got interest, or we've got other factors that we want to pick up. So equals end of month minus the start of the month plus 1, and here Control Shift right arrow, and we are able to pick up the number of days in the month. So that really helps us when we want to look at leap years and other days in the year, and that's important. Now we want to aggregate some of that data across, in this case, we're going to use calendar years, but you could use financial years. We can choose either end or start of the month, Control Shift right arrow, and there we have our time series. So now we want to aggregate expenses into particular years, or we could do quarter ends or whatever else we want to do. This is an important part of that process to really understand how we can aggregate time periods, and that's an important part of that. So what we're going to do next is really use that data to then build out the P&L, or effectively the expense analysis. So we're going to use another dynamic array called unique. I really like unique. This is really, really cool. So again, table PL, which is our table that we were referencing before. And now what we're going to make reference to is the account name. Why? Because this is the name that we want to pick up in our chart of accounts. So I'm no longer needing, if suddenly if you add a new chart of account, guess what? The data populates and the chart of account populates. The only thing you need to remember is that will mean that this dynamic array will expand another row down. So I've left one extra spot for that extra month, for that extra category. If it does, then of course we'll be able to do that dynamically. And so we need to make sure that that occurs. So I'd love to see on the chat who's actually used dynamic arrays and if they're familiar with some of that. I think it's probably one of the most exciting innovations that Excel has brought over in recent times. This is really going to change time and effort in terms of what we're going to do. So really, really, really powerful stuff. Now we're going to use some ifs. That's great, Carl. Never used dynamic arrays. Keen to get this. Awesome. Great stuff. Now, back in the day when I was building models, I used to use nested if statements. If, then an if, then an if, then an if, then an if. That becomes quite complex. But now what you have is you've got some ifs and you have ifs. So what this allows you to do is get away from nesting, but actually allow you to do some really cool stuff in a much neater formula. So we're going to use the formula some ifs. We're going to pick up, again, the same table P&L. We're going to pick up the group values. So I don't want to pick up the org values. I want to pick up the group values, which is post-converted Aussie dollars. we are going to pick up the account name in that table, and we're going to sum everything relating to, this has got two criteria. So the first criteria is the account name, which will drag down and across. But here we are using our traditional absolute and relative references. And here we're going to have the reference to the end of month. So we want to pick up what's the end of month for marketing and advertising, push enter 16,000. Now I'm just going to go Control Shift right arrow. By the way, I've hidden the rest of the data, the rest of the columns to the right, because it makes it easy for me to do the formulas. If you don't do that and you just have it, you go Control Shift right arrow, it's going to go all the way to the end. It really helps you gets quite fast at how you're doing some of these things. So now I've highlighted right, I've highlighted down, I go Control R, Control D, and hey presto, it's done all of that data for me. Alt equals Control Shift right arrow, Control R. So now I've got all my actual data sitting there. Of course, forecast, it's not a full month. There's obviously a few expenses, but we know that that's going to be the forecast month because we're only partway through the month, but we're going to forecast for the balance of the month using some logic. Now we have our forecast growth rate. For expenses, most of what we do is just growth rate based, but this is where you can get all more sophisticated in your logic. What we're going to do is we're going to use our third dynamic array. Now, dynamic arrays work with a new thing called a hash, not an absolute. So I'm going to use B18 hash, push enter, and it automatically brings me the list of above. So just by referencing something and putting a hash afterwards allows that to be an automatic dynamic array. So now I'm going to look at my forecast period. Let's go pick that up. I'm going to shift down and across. What I'm going to do here is I'm just going to assume across the board 0.25% increase. I'm not going to just push enter. I'm going to push control and enter. And that allows it to populate the entire range, right, all the way across. So now all of a sudden I have that information. I've got my forecast data. I've got all of that sitting there ready and waiting for me. Now I'm going to go again. I'm going to go just picking up that hash, pick that up. And now what I want to do is I want to pick up my forecast. So from this perspective, what I'm trying to do, because it's 0.25, what I'm trying to do is actually pick up the particular items. So what this is saying is, if it is an actual period, take the actuals. If not, I wanted to take the previous period and multiply that by the growth rate, which is H47. So push enter, that's actuals, Control Shift right arrow, Control R. So now it's populated everything for me, forecast, and Control down, and everything else is coming. Now I go Control Alt Enter, Control R, and what we should have is exactly what I've said in my slides, which you will get in the end, is we have 252,919 in that last period. Now, granted, that's a very simplistic way of building the forecast, but at least you have a way and a method of doing that that is highly structured. So an important stepping stone to get structured in terms of how you deal with expense data. But of course, with this template that you will have, it's automatically populated for you. So all of these analyses and this template has already been populated with this information. Once you pull all of that into your particular data set, which you can, you literally can go and you can download your Excel. The Excel files will be sent out, Dana, afterwards. And then, we've got some other dashboards and analysis that's made available. In the solution, which we're not going to build, I'm going to show you this final report. So once you've processed that, you then can process your pivot table. So, you can then add your actuals, you can look at your information, you can slice and dice all of that information. You can look at that with slices. You can search that by merchant. You've got a pivot chart. If you've never used a pivot chart, that can be quite useful. You've got a pivot chart with slices, so I can change all of those. All of this is in the instruction manual that we would we'll send out to you. Of course, the recording will also be available as well. Now, when we take our actuals and forecast, we're going to put this in. Again, we're using some sum ifs. We're using some dynamic arrays. You can see the hashes coming in. So this allows us to be quite targeted, and we can look at, particular line items. We can look at various expenses, and that's quite useful in terms of looking at actuals and forecast. What we've then built off the back of that, you've seen some of those, but we've built a dynamic expense selection chart. So now I can compare fuel or any of the other expenses that I want to against food and drink and electronics. And I can see that over the financial periods. Of course, we've got historical data, but we've also got forecast data. So this allows us to really have those conversations about trends and analysis, moving averages of where we're going with expenses. And that's a really useful thing to do. When you're trying to build your models, you want to understand relationships between certain expenses, but also understand where you're going. It's not just about what we've spent, but what are the actions we need to take to change that? And I think that's an important part of that overall process of understanding your data. So let's go back to the slides. By the way, if there's any other questions, please feel free to pop them in if there's anything else. So like I said, outputs, pivots, and dashboards, I've shown you those. That's where you kind of want to go at the end. So once you've got your data right, once you've got the logic and the formulas built, then you will be able to get all of that. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to send you the raw data file. We're going to send you a training manual. We're going to send you the template, the blank template, and you can go and reproduce this. The best way for you to learn some of these skills is by actually getting stuck in and doing it. Pivot tables, if you've never created a pivot table, there's plenty of YouTube videos on that. Pivot charts, same thing. Most of that stuff is reasonably straightforward. But I guess some of the other aspects of dynamic arrays, I've just shown you how to use some of those there. And you also going to get probably 3 to 4 weeks afterwards. We do want you to have a go at going through it. We might do a follow-up session post where we can go through the solution and people can ask, but ultimately, this is your ability to learn and apply these skills to data that you already have today. So if you are a Weel customer, of course, you've got this data. If you don't, you're not a Weel customer, that's not a problem. Maybe you will become one after this, but of course, you have the ability to use data that we're going to give you. So really, next steps is about wanting you to take the process and understand what we've built, understand the logic, understand the structure, making sure that you're cross-checking the accuracy against what we've given you, and keep practicing dynamic arrays and Power Query. The combination of these two is absolutely game-changing. I launched EXL Cloud because I saw there was an ability to take what Excel does to a whole new level and use content and models that we've built for people. So for those that want to have a look, we've got a quick cash flow model to download. You can have a look at some videos online. And these are all some of the dashboards, again, all connected to Xero. But yeah, I think just a quick recap of the objectives. So hopefully I met them all, Damon. You'll be the judge of that. But certainly foundations and concepts, can't underestimate the importance of that. If you don't know what you're building or why you're building it or what's the story, then you're going to get lost. If you don't know how to forecast, also important. Dashboards are cool, but the conversation is even better. And it's so important that we can understand that. And practical steps, you've got some content, you've got me hitting the keyboard a couple of times, misspelling Weel, which I'm sure I'll get ragged on for a while. But then, of course, you've got stuff to take away and next steps. So, Damon, any other thoughts?
No, look, that's fantastic, Lance. And I think everyone, certainly from the comments coming through, I think everyone's found that super valuable today. So look, I think, what I'd encourage everyone to do, there's a Q&A function in Zoom at the bottom. Like if there are any specific questions, we've got a few minutes now at the end. If there are any specific questions, please send them through and we can cover them. Lance, perhaps an initial couple of questions from me. I think compatibility with different versions of Excel and things. How do you sort of approach that? Because I know some of the newer functions, not everyone in the organization's on the latest version of Excel. How do you sort of think about that and just sort of make sure?
Yeah, look, that's a great point, Damien. I'd say Power Query's been around for 10 years. So at least that version of Excel that you're using, if you're using 2010 and prior, oh my God, you're in the dark ages. You're literally pre-computing almost. So I think this is an important time for you to upgrade. However, if you're not with, I think, the Microsoft 365 and you're still using, I think 2019 was the last one, which they started to still call it 2019. Now it's just 365 and the updates are more regular. This is a way in which you can give the business case to going on to be more efficient. The cost of a Microsoft license these days is ridiculously cheap for the benefit and the time you're going to save. However, if right now you don't have it and you're not going to get it and you want to learn, that's fine. You've got Power Query. Dynamic arrays, just use normal formulas. Dynamic arrays just makes it easier. So you could, in the 60 time period counter that I'll put in, you could literally go 1 and in the next cell go equals 1 plus 1 copyright to get to 60, right? A lot of the other formulas were just standard. Yes, you can do absolute reference and relative reference. Unique, I'm not sure if there's a unique formula for the table. I'd have to check. I don't know, maybe there's the need for some VBA or something else, but there might be some other ththings that you need to do. If you're on a Mac, depends on which version of Mac as well. Google Sheets, good luck to you. Sorry. I know there's lots of Google Sheets people out there. Google has its own querying tools and other things, which are quite amazing. I've never invested the time to learn them, but Google Sheets and Google Query and BigQuery, I've heard lots of complaints about it. And to be honest, a Google Sheet starts to struggle with bigger data online. And what happens if you're not online? What happens if you want to work on a desert island one day? Or Google Sheets ain't going to help you there. So I think you've got to, maybe not a desert island, a tropical island. Sounds better than a desert island. But I think the important thing is really understanding the right tools. Microsoft are putting so much effort into the development of the tool. So if you're on Excel for Mac, I think it's Excel 365 for Mac, I think allows Power Query. Not sure about dynamic arrays. I always say, if you're not on a PC in Excel, you're going to have some uphill battles. So I can't help you there. We've chosen to back Microsoft and Excel 365. I do feel for people that don't get the support to use the best spreadsheeting tool on the planet, but there's
that's all right. I think everyone from this will understand the tools available in Microsoft Excel. So that's great. Yeah. Maybe if I go through a couple of the other questions, Lance, Ying has a question. How often should the reconciliation process be completed for this model that you've built? How do you sort of think about updating it over time?
Yeah, great question. So what I'd say is you'd want to definitely, at the very minimum, do a monthly reconciliation. At the very least. But if you're looking at trends and things are going a bit out of whack and you're not things aren't working, sorry, things been pinged. If you're getting issues with trend analysis or there's issues with information and expenses are going a little bit off track, then I'd be doing that more regularly. And the great thing about this is, as you saw in that forecast month, the forecast month was a part month, right? Those expenses were way down on the previous month, just because of the nature of the data. So what we've got to do is getting preemptive around this. So because we've got access to great tools like Power BI, we can really use and expand that analysis. And I wouldn't necessarily call it a reconciliation process. What I would call it is an insight process. So here I've got Power BI. I can start to look at variance analysis, and I can start to look at fuel, and I can look at other things. So when you've got some of this information, I can look at divisional insights and comparisons of quarter on quarter, and look at particular people. If I want to look at Betty and Alex and look at their expenses, I think, not necessarily a reconciliation process, but an insight or discovery process. I'd say you should be doing that probably more often than once a month, just so that you can keep on top of what's happening in the expenses space.
Yep, that's great. And then try to question, how would the model change if you had multiple account types in the data?
Easy. It's completely flexible. So because we're using dynamic arrays, the data will automatically populate and expand and contract based on multiple accounts. We've actually got a single entity example in this case, but if you have multi-entity, I'm sure Weel deals with multi-entities as well. And so the data would just come through multi-entities and then you'd stitch that together. So I don't think that's a problem at all. In fact, I think it's better, the approach that we're taking, because it's so dynamic. This is an important part of being able to expand the analysis and the forecasting, agnostic of the data. Because what we're doing is we applying a data-driven process engine, being Power Query, and a data-driven formula language, being dynamic arrays, so that we're not beholden to manual work. And I think that's the whole purpose of it being designed that way, so that we are not impacted by changes. Yep.
Now, I think we've got a couple of polls we're going to run just as we do the last couple of questions. I think Adriana will put those up as we speak. There we are. Now, what about Lance? The insights table, Ying has just asked, whereabouts do you find that?
So the insights table is in Power BI. So I didn't want to blow people's brains too much with doing both Power BI and Excel and dynamic arrays in Power Query, but I've built that on the back of the data, and also made some assumptions and randomized staff names and randomized the forecast. So the insights table is Power BI. It's not in the current information, but I guess the purpose of the insights table, it's not really the mechanics of Power BI. What I was trying to do is, it's the mechanics of the data story. The important thing is really understanding what are the insights I'm trying to get from the data. And it's the relationships, the trends, the stuff that I was thinking about. So not all of that data comes through Weel, so I had to create some of it myself, but there's nothing stopping you. I'm sure Weel has Weel cards and you can attach particular people to that. So this is really useful. You don't need Power BI to do it. I just did it in Power BI because I quite enjoy the tool, but you could use just normal Excel as well. No, you don't need to. Yeah, so I just answered that, Ding. You don't need Power BI to build those insight tables. Ultimately, they're just tables with slices. That's no different to the other tables and slices that I did in the rest of Excel. I just wanted to show people that as you start this journey of learning how to use Power Query, it's already a stepping stone to using Power BI, because Power Query is in Power BI as well. So it's just getting people to, once you know one thing, guess what? There's something else around the corner that you've got to learn, and Power BI does come with 365 Office. So, the sooner people get familiar with it as well, would be really useful, particularly for larger data sets, I think.
Yep. No, that's good. All right. Now, there's a couple of other questions in the chat window. So one of them is, how many tracking categories could you add, and could you work with multiple tracking categories from different entities, Lance?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So just like we've got, the multiple, I'll just go back to the file. We have the ability to, it's just a table structure. So if I go back to my setup, just here we've got column headings. Literally we can just add additional, so A, B, C, you can just add all of the tracking categories and work through, but you've got to make sure that aligns to the data source. So I don't think the Weel data source comes with tracking categories. So you'd have to do some matching of that and put some logic to that. But in the Excel Cloud templates that we've got multi-tracking category analysis, which comes out of our performance report. and as well as a lot of the other reports that we've built. So that's more of a, I guess, a zero Weel sort of data gap, because the data that I got straight out of Weel didn't come with tracking categories, but everything that we've done comes with tracking categories. So it just allows us to do that.
Yep. And Lance, there's I can see a few comments there about like Mac users. So is it worth just maybe just a recap on the comments you made earlier? It sounds like a lot of what you've described today, you don't actually need like Power BI or like specific tools to do, and it's universally applicable across both a Mac and a Windows.
Correct. Provided you're on the latest Mac, I did understand, I did hear that the latest Mac, Microsoft 365 Mac version does have Power Query. I've never looked at it. I don't know the features, but what I've done there is pretty basic. By the way, Power Query has a code called mscript. You can copy the mscript and dump it into your Mac if you wanted to use it. But it should still work. Dynamic arrays, I'm not sure, but I guess again, there's no issue with a Mac because you can just use normal formulas. You don't need to use dynamic arrays. You can just use normal formulas. So yeah, Macs are still doable. You've got to make sure you're, there is another option. In fact, there's two other options. The other option is you run Parallels in a Mac, which allows you to run Microsoft Excel as opposed to Excel for Mac in a Mac. So Parallels actually boots up the Microsoft operating system, and Boot Camp and Parallels are both the other two options that you have. So if you absolutely can't get your hands on a PC, look at Boot Camp, look at Parallels, because those are two other alternatives that you have to run. And I know lots of world-leading financial modelers use Parallels and Boot Camp because they just can't get away from their Mac. They love it. I don't, but I know there are lots of people that do, but you can use Parallels and Boot Camp to stay with Mac and still get access to these features.
Cool. Now, look, Lance, as probably an indication of success for this particular webinar, I think there was near universal support in the quick poll we ran for both people looking for a copy of the materials that you went through today and also people interested in a follow-up session to this one. So I think that's a great indication that we hit on the objectives and what we're looking to achieve today. So look, that's great. I think for everyone on the line, we will shortly circulate by email a copy of the both the model, an indicative anonymized set of data that you can experiment with, and a set of instructions, as well as a recording for this session, so you can follow along and replay it in your own time. And then with Lance, we'll look to see if we can find a date to do a bit of a follow-up session so that you can come back to this same forum, having had a chance to play around with the model, and we can sort of help you take it to the next level and also address any questions or challenges that might have come up as you work through it in your own time. So look, from us, Lance, Australian CFO community, thank you so much for your time and participating in this today and sharing your insights with this group. Super valuable. We all got a lot out of it. So very grateful for that.
Thanks, Damon. My pleasure. And I'm always keen to help people move along and get with the latest tools in Excel, because they are incredible. So yeah, thanks everyone. Make sure that this doesn't become an hour wasted of time. Make sure that you invest this time and go dabble in Power Query and dynamic arrays. I think if there's one key takeaway that I'd say out of this is absolutely get into Power Query and dynamic arrays, because it's going to change the way you work. You're going to save so much time and you're going to love it.
Right.
I think. Anyway.
And thank you very much to our audience. Thanks everyone for tuning in. Great to see such strong participation in this session. I think really indicates that this is a topic close to a lot of people.